Nobody remembers the 5 minutes that changed their life while they are living them. They only recognize them later. Looking back, I could pinpoint the exact moment everything started. It happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon about 20 miles outside Manhattan. The sky had been gray since sunrise. By the time I finished my shift at the veterinary clinic, a steady drizzle covered the roads and painted the world in shades of silver and charcoal. I was tired. Not dramatic movie tired. Real tired. The kind that settles into your shoulders after years of balancing work, bills, and responsibilities nobody else sees. My father had another doctor's appointment the following morning. The electric bill was due in 3 days. My car needed new brakes. Life was not falling apart. It was simply expensive. As usual, I turned onto a quiet county road that cut through a wooded area on my way home. Traffic was light because of the weather. Most drivers wanted to get wherever they were going as quickly as possible. I understood the feeling. Then I saw the sedan. It sat on the shoulder with its hazard lights blinking through the rain. One tire had completely collapsed. A man stood beside the vehicle looking down at it. For a second I kept driving. Most people would have. There were service companies for this kind of thing. Cell phones. Roadside assistance. Plenty of solutions. But after about 50 yards, something made me glance into the rearview mirror. The man was alone. Rain soaked his dark coat. The road was nearly empty. Before I could talk myself out of it, I sighed and pulled over. The windshield wipers continued sweeping back and forth as I parked behind the disabled car. I grabbed my jacket and stepped into the rain. The man looked up when I approached. He appeared to be in his early 40s. Tall. Broad shoulders. Dark hair damp from the weather. Expensive coat. Expensive shoes. Everything about him suggested someone who did not usually spend afternoons changing flat tires. Need help? I asked. He looked mildly surprised. You stopped. I laughed. That is usually how helping works. For the first time, a faint smile crossed his face. Fair point. I glanced at the tire. Do you have a spare? Ido. Jack. Yes. Then we are already doing better than half the people I have met. The smile returned. This time it lasted longer. Together we opened the trunk. Everything inside was perfectly organized. Of course it was. The man seemed like the type who planned things. Unfortunately, planning had not prevented a nail from finding his tire. Rain tapped against the pavement as we worked. He followed instructions surprisingly well. I showed him where to position the jack. How to loosen the lug nuts before lifting the car. Nothing complicated. Just practical knowledge learned from years of owning unreliable vehicles. You seem experienced, he said. Old cars teach valuable life lessons. Such as, I tightened another lug nut. Never trust a warning light to wait until payday. That earned an actual laugh. Deep. Genuine. For some reason hearing it made me smile too. 15 minutes later, the spare tire was installed. The problem was solved. The man brushed rainwater from his sleeve and looked at the repaired wheel. Then he looked at me. There was something unusual in his expression. Not gratitude exactly. Curiosity. As if he was trying to understand why a stranger had stopped at all. At the time I thought nothing of it. I was simply ready to get home. What I did not know was that the man standing beside that sedan would remember every word of our conversation long after I forgot it ever happened. Some people leave an impression because of what they have. Others leave an impression because of what they do. I thought the afternoon was over once the tire was changed. The rain was still falling. The road was still empty. The stranger thanked me, and I expected us to go our separate ways forever. That is how most roadside encounters end. Temporary problem. Temporary conversation.
Permanent goodbye.
I wiped rainwater from my forehead and started walking back toward my car. Wait. I turned around. The man was reaching into his coat pocket. A second later he pulled out a wallet. Please, he said. At least let me compensate you for your time. I looked at the cash he was holding and immediately shook my head. No. He seemed surprised. No. No. He glanced at the money as if trying to determine whether I had misunderstood. You stopped in the rain. You helped me solve a problem. You spent nearly 20 minutes here. And now your tire is fixed. That is exactly why you should take it. I laughed softly. That is exactly why I should not. For a moment neither of us spoke. Rain continued tapping against the cars around us. The woods bordering the road swayed gently in the wind. The man studied me carefully. Not suspiciously. Curiously. Most people would accept. I shrugged. Most people probably would not have stopped. That answer seemed to affect him more than I expected. His expression changed slightly. Not dramatically. Just enough to suggest he was thinking about something deeper than a flat tire. Finally, he lowered the money. Then at least tell me your name. Hannah. Hannah. He repeated it as though committing it to memory. I am Vincent. We shook hands. His grip was firm. Confident. The kind developed by someone accustomed to being taken seriously. Up close I noticed details I had missed before. The watch on his wrist probably cost more than my car. His shoes looked brand new despite standing in the rain. Everything about him suggested success. Yet none of it explained why he had been stranded alone on a rural road. Well, Vincent, I said. Try to avoid driving over nails. That earned another laugh. I will do my best. I smiled and turned toward my car. Then I paused. One more thing. Yes. Get that tire replaced tomorrow. The spare is only temporary. Understood. This time I finally left. As I drove away, the encounter quickly faded into the background of my thoughts. Life had a way of demanding immediate attention. By the time I reached home, I was focused on groceries, laundry, and my father's medication schedule. The stranger on the roadside became just another small story in a long list of ordinary days. Across the county, however, Vincent Romano was having a very different evening. He sat in the back seat of a black luxury SUV moving toward Manhattan. The city skyline glowed ahead through sheets of rain. Across from him sat an associate, reviewing documents on a tablet. Neither man spoke for several minutes. Finally, the associate looked up. Everything all right? Vincent stared out the window. A woman stopped to help me today. The associate blinked. With the tire? Vincent nodded. Interesting. She refused money. That earned a genuine reaction. Refused. Vincent looked back toward the rain-covered highway disappearing behind them. Somewhere out there, Hannah Brooks was probably making dinner, paying bills, or worrying about responsibilities nobody else noticed. She had no idea that a simple act of kindness had become the most memorable part of his day. And for reasons Vincent could not yet explain, he found himself wondering if he would ever see her again. The people who change your life rarely announce themselves when they arrive. Most of the time they look ordinary. The week after the roadside encounter passed exactly as I expected. Work, home, groceries, bills, repeat. Every morning I arrived at the veterinary clinic before 8 o'clock. Every evening I left tired but satisfied. The animals never cared about bank accounts, job titles, or social status. They only cared whether someone showed up for them. In a strange way, I appreciated that simplicity. One Tuesday afternoon, I was helping a nervous golden retriever through an examination when my phone vibrated in my pocket. I ignored it. 5 minutes later it vibrated again. Then again. By the time my shift ended, I had 3 missed calls from my father. My stomach immediately tightened. He rarely called during work hours. I stepped outside and returned the call. Dad, everything is fine, he said quickly. Do not panic. Which of course immediately made me panic. Fortunately, the situation was not serious. A plumbing leak had appeared beneath the kitchen sink. Nothing dangerous. Just another expense. Another item added to the growing list of responsibilities. That evening, I spent nearly 2 hours helping him clean water from the cabinet and arranging for repairs. By the time I finally sat down, exhaustion settled over me like a heavy blanket. I stared at the ceiling and wondered how many more years life would feel like an endless series of problems waiting their turn. Across the city, Vincent Romano was having a very different week. The roadside encounter should have disappeared from his memory. He had meetings, businesses, investments, endless responsibilities. Yet somehow, Hannah Brooks kept returning to his thoughts. It was not because she was dramatic. Quite the opposite. She was ordinary. Genuinely ordinary. And that was exactly what made her stand out. One evening, while reviewing reports in his Manhattan office, Vincent found himself remembering a single sentence. Most people probably would not have stopped. He leaned back in his chair. The words echoed in his mind, not because they were profound, because they were true. In his world, almost everything came with conditions. Favors created obligations. Generosity expected returns. Kindness often arrived with hidden motives attached. Yet Hannah had pulled over in the rain simply because someone needed help. Nothing more. Nothing less. You are distracted. Vincent looked up. His longtime associate stood near the office doorway. Am I? You have been staring at the same page for 10 minutes. Vincent closed the report. Have you ever met someone who did something small, but could not stop thinking about it afterward? The associate raised an eyebrow. That sounds unusually philosophical. A faint smile crossed Vincent's face. Maybe. The conversation ended there. Yet the question remained. 2 days later, Hannah arrived at work to find several crates waiting near the reception desk. Supplies. Equipment. Medical materials. Far more than the clinic normally received at one time. The clinic manager looked equally confused. Did someone make a donation? Hannah asked. The manager glanced at the paperwork. Bzgzgsi. Everyone spent the morning speculating about the mysterious donor. Hannah barely thought about it. Good things occasionally happened. There was no reason to overanalyze them. But somewhere deep inside, a strange feeling lingered. Not suspicion. More like curiosity. The same feeling Vincent had experienced standing beside that damaged tire. Neither of them understood it yet. Neither of them realized that an ordinary act of kindness had already started setting other events into motion. And while Hannah continued living her life unaware, Vincent found himself making a decision he normally never would have considered. He wanted to know more about the woman who stopped on a rainy road when everyone else kept driving. The people who need help the most are often the ones who never ask for it. I did not know it then, but that truth was about to become very important. 2 weeks passed after the anonymous donation arrived at the clinic. Life continued moving at its usual pace. Every day brought another appointment, another treatment plan, another responsibility waiting to be handled. If something unusual was happening behind the scenes, I remained completely unaware of it. My focus stayed on work and my father. His health was stable, which felt like a victory. Not a dramatic one, just the kind that lets you sleep a little easier at night. One Thursday afternoon, I was organizing patient files when my manager called me into her office. The request immediately made me nervous. Most employees associate those words with problems. I certainly did. You wanted to see me? I asked. She smiled. Relax. You are not in trouble. That helped a little. Not much. She slid a folder across the desk. I wanted to talk about your future. I blinked. My future? You have been here almost 4 years. 3 years and 10 months. Exactly. She leaned back in her chair. You work harder than anyone in this building. I felt embarrassed immediately. Compliments always made me uncomfortable. I just do my job. No. She shook her head. You do much more than that. Then she explained that a new regional animal welfare initiative was being developed. Expanded community outreach. Educational programs. Rescue partnerships. The organization needed someone to help coordinate field operations and public engagement. The position would come with better hours, improved benefits, and significantly higher pay. Why are you telling me this? She smiled again. Because they specifically asked whether you would be interested. For several seconds I could not speak. Better pay alone would have changed everything. Medical bills, home repairs, savings, all the things that constantly lived in the back of my mind. Yet something felt strange. Why me? My manager opened the folder. Inside were performance reviews, recommendations, volunteer records, and notes documenting years of work. Things I had forgotten about myself. Because people notice more than you think. The words stayed with me long after I left her office. That evening, while driving home, I found myself replaying the conversation repeatedly. Better opportunities do not simply appear from nowhere. At least not in my experience. Usually someone opens a door. The question was who? Across Manhattan, Vincent Romano stood beside the window of his office overlooking the city. Below him, thousands of lights stretched across the skyline. Behind him, an associate reviewed several reports. The outreach position was approved, the associate said. Vincent nodded. Good. She will probably receive the offer tomorrow. Vincent remained silent. The associate studied him for a moment. You know, most people would have forgotten about a roadside encounter by now. Vincent glanced toward the city. Most people would have kept driving. The associate laughed softly. Fair enough. Silence returned. Yet Vincent's thoughts remained elsewhere. He had learned more about Hannah Brooks over the past few weeks. Not through obsession. Through curiosity. What he discovered only deepened his respect. Long hours. Family responsibilities. Volunteer work. Quiet generosity. Everywhere he looked, he found evidence of the same thing. She consistently put other people first. The realization bothered him more than he expected. Not because it was unusual, because it was rare. Meanwhile, sitting at my kitchen table miles away, I opened the folder again and stared at the opportunity in front of me. It felt exciting, life-changing even. Yet a small voice in the back of my mind kept whispering the same question. Why now? And for the first time since that rainy afternoon beside the road, I found myself thinking about Vincent Romano. Sometimes the hardest part of receiving a blessing is believing you deserve it. The opportunity stayed on my kitchen table for 3 days. Every morning I looked at it while drinking coffee. Every evening I looked at it again before going to bed. The numbers alone felt unreal. Better salary, better benefits, flexible scheduling, the kind of position people spent years hoping to find. Yet I could not shake the feeling that something unusual was happening. Life had never handed me anything this easily before. By Sunday evening, my father finally grew tired of watching me stare at the paperwork. You are overthinking. I looked up from the table. I am evaluating. You are overthinking. I laughed. Those are not the same thing. They are when you spend 72 hours evaluating. He had a point. I leaned back in my chair and sighed. What if I am not qualified? My father stared at me as if I had just announced the sky was green. Hannah. What? You practically run half that clinic already. That is different. Why? I opened my mouth, then closed it, because I did not have a good answer. Deep down I knew the real problem. It was not qualification. It was fear. Fear that things might improve and then disappear again. Fear that hope would make disappointment hurt more. My father seemed to understand. He always did. You know what I think? He asked. What? I think you have spent so many years taking care of everyone else that you forgot how to accept good things for yourself. The words followed me all night. By Monday morning, I submitted the application. The interview happened 3 days later. The entire process felt surprisingly natural. The people were professional. The mission aligned perfectly with everything I cared about. Community outreach, animal welfare, education programs. It did not feel like a dream job. It felt like a job I never allowed myself to imagine. A week later, the offer arrived. I got it. For nearly 30 seconds, I simply stared at the email. Then I read it again. Then a third time. The salary increase alone would completely change my situation. The first person I called was my father. The second person I called was my best friend, Megan. By the end of the day, I had smiled more than I had in months. Cross Manhattan. Vincent Romano received similar news through a much shorter conversation. She accepted. Vincent looked up from his desk. Good. His associate smiled. That is all you have to say? Vincent returned his attention to the document in front of him. What else should I say? Perhaps that your plan worked. A faint smile appeared. It was never a plan. Really? The associate laughed softly. Because from where I am sitting it looks exactly like one. Vincent did not answer immediately. The truth was complicated. He had not created the opportunity. Hannah earned it herself. Every recommendation, every review, every qualification, those belonged entirely to her. He had only ensured that the right people notice what was already there. Yet even that small involvement felt unusual. He was not accustomed to caring about strangers. Especially not for this long. Later that evening, I stopped by a grocery store on my way home. For the first time in years, I found myself calculating expenses without immediate anxiety. The realization felt almost foreign. As I pushed the shopping cart through the aisle, I caught myself smiling. Then I thought about the rainy road, the flat tire, the expensive shoes.
Vincent Romano.
The memory appeared unexpectedly and refused to leave. I still did not know who he really was. I still did not know why I kept thinking about him. But standing there beneath the bright grocery store lights, I suddenly had the strange feeling that our story was not finished yet. There are moments in life when silence feels louder than words, when you realize something is changing even though nothing visible has happened yet. I felt that kind of silence the day I started my new position. The first week passed in a blur of introductions, training sessions, and unfamiliar hallways. Everyone was polite. Everyone was professional. Yet I could not ignore the strange sense that I had stepped into a life that had been carefully arranged before I arrived. New desks, new responsibilities, new expectations. All of it felt like progress. And still, I kept thinking about how none of it had come from nowhere. On Thursday afternoon, I was assigned to meet with a regional coordinator about upcoming field operations. I walked into a glass-walled conference room expecting a standard meeting. Instead, I found something unexpected. The coordinator paused when I entered, then looked down at a folder, then looked back up again. "You are Hannah Brooks, correct?" "Yes." He nodded slowly. "Interesting." That single word immediately made my stomach tighten. "Is something wrong?" I asked. "No," he replied. "Quite the opposite." He slid a document across the table. It contained details about the expansion of community programs, new funding allocations, and several pilot initiatives. My name appeared in multiple sections, not as a participant, as a key contributor. I frowned. "I think there is a mistake." The coordinator shook his head. "There is no mistake. Your work was specifically reviewed and recommended." I stared at the page. "By who?" He hesitated. "That information was not included in my briefing." That answer should have ended the conversation. Instead, it only made it worse. That night, I could not stop thinking about it. Someone had been paying attention to my work long before I entered this position. Someone had influenced decisions I was only now beginning to understand. The feeling was not fear. It was curiosity mixed with something harder to name. Meanwhile, across the city, Vincent Romano stood in a quiet office overlooking Manhattan. The skyline stretched endlessly beyond the glass. His associate entered without knocking. "She is asking questions." Vincent did not turn around. "That was expected. Are you going to tell her?" A long pause followed. "Not yet." The associate sighed. "You are aware this could become complicated." Vincent finally turned from the window. "Everything important becomes complicated eventually. And if she finds out too soon?" Vincent considered that for a moment. "Then she will react based on emotion instead of understanding." The associate raised an eyebrow. "And you prefer understanding?" Vincent's expression softened slightly. "I prefer honesty. But timing matters." The conversation ended there, but the weight of it lingered in the room. The next morning, I tried to focus on my responsibilities. Paperwork, scheduling, meetings. Yet every few hours my thoughts drifted back to the same question. Who had been watching me? And why? By mid-afternoon, I decided to take a different route home. It was not planned, just a feeling. The kind of instinct that does not make sense until later. I drove slowly through familiar streets, passing intersections I had traveled 100 times before. Then I saw it. A black sedan parked outside a quiet cafe near the edge of downtown. My foot eased off the accelerator. For a moment I considered continuing forward, ignoring it, pretending I had not noticed. But something about the scene felt familiar in a way I could not explain. I pulled into a nearby space. The cafe door opened just as I stepped out of my car. And there he was.
Vincent Romano.
Standing as if he had been expecting this moment all along. His eyes met mine immediately.
No surprise. No hesitation.
Just calm recognition. "Hannah," he said quietly. My heart tightened. "We need to talk." And in that instant I understood something important. The answers I had been looking for were no longer hidden in documents or coincidences. They were standing right in front of me. There are moments when truth does not arrive gently. It arrives all at once, without warning, leaving no space to pretend you are still in control. I stood outside the cafe staring at Vincent Romano, my mind struggling to connect the calm man in front of me with the invisible thread that had been pulling at my life for weeks. The street behind us continued moving normally. Cars passed. People walked by with coffee cups and phones pressed to their ears. No one noticed that something important was happening between two strangers. Vincent stepped slightly aside, gesturing toward a quiet table near the window. We should sit. It was not a request that felt optional. It was calm, controlled. So I followed him inside. The cafe was almost empty. Rain from earlier had left soft gray reflections on the glass windows. We sat across from each other. For a few seconds neither of us spoke. I studied him carefully now in a way I had not before. Not as a stranger needing help with a tire. Not as a name in a document. But as a person sitting across from me who seemed far too composed for the weight I now suspected he carried. Start talking, I finally said. My voice was steady, but I could hear the tension underneath it. Vincent did not react defensively. Instead he nodded once. Fair. He leaned slightly forward. I did not meet you by accident. My stomach tightened. That much I already guessed. A faint hint of acknowledgement passed through his expression. Good. Then we do not need to waste time denying reality. I exhaled slowly. So tell me the truth. He looked down for a moment, as if choosing the simplest version of something complicated. After that day on the roadside, I asked someone to look into your situation. I felt a sharp flicker of disbelief. You investigated me? Not in the way you are thinking. His tone remained controlled. I wanted to understand what kind of person stops to help a stranger in the rain and refuses money afterward. I crossed my arms. That sounds like a justification. It is an explanation. I searched his face for any sign of dishonesty. I did not find any. That somehow made it harder. Vincent continued. What I found was someone who works more than she admits. Someone who carries responsibility without complaint. Someone who gives without expecting anything in return. I looked away briefly. Hearing my life described so plainly from someone else's perspective felt uncomfortable. That does not answer why you started changing things around me, I said. The job offer. The donation to my clinic. The opportunities one did not apply for. He paused. No. It does not. Silence settled between us again. Outside, rain began falling lightly against the window. Vincent spoke again, quieter this time. I did not interfere because I wanted to control your life. I interfered because I recognized something I rarely see. And what is that? I asked. He met my eyes directly. Honesty without calculation. The words hit deeper than I expected. I did not respond immediately. My thoughts moved quickly, trying to organize emotions that refused to settle into order. Do you understand how strange this feels? I finally said. A stranger. Stops on a road. A few weeks later my entire career shifts. My life changes. And you are at the center of it. Vincent nodded slowly. Yes. And you decided I should just accept that? No. His answer was immediate. I decided you deserved to know the truth when you were ready for it. That stopped me. Not because I agreed with it. Because I could not immediately dismiss it either. I looked at him for a long moment. The same man who had once been standing beside a broken-down car in the rain now sat across from me in a quiet cafe discussing decisions that had quietly reshaped my future. Why me? I asked again, softer this time. Vincent did not answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before. Because people like you are rare. I frowned slightly. People like me? People who stop, he said simply, when everyone else keeps driving. For the first time since this began, I did not have a quick response. The words settled between us like something fragile. Outside, the rain continued. Inside, everything had changed again. And I realized that whatever came next, I was no longer just a passenger in my own story. There is a point in every story where uncertainty becomes impossible to ignore. Not because everything is revealed, but because pretending nothing is happening becomes harder than facing the truth. After I left the cafe, I drove home in silence. The conversation with Vincent replayed in my mind with uncomfortable clarity. His words were precise, carefully chosen. Nothing about him felt careless, and that made everything more complicated. I kept asking myself the same question over and over. If he had been watching my life, what else did he know? And more importantly, what had he already changed without me realizing it? That night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the rainy road again. The broken tire. The calm way he had looked at me before I even knew his name. By morning I had made a decision. I needed clarity. Not assumptions. Not guesses. Just truth. I called him just after sunrise. He answered on the second ring. I was expecting this call, he said before I even spoke. I paused. Of course you were. There was a brief silence on the line. Then he said, Are you available this afternoon? I hesitated only a moment. Yes. I will send a driver. I almost refused automatically, but something stopped me. Instead, I simply said, Fine. By mid-afternoon, a black car arrived outside my apartment. The same quiet efficiency as before.
No unnecessary explanation. No visible urgency.
Just certainty. The drive took us away from the city this time, toward a private property on the outskirts where tall gates opened without question. I felt my pulse tighten as we passed through. When the car stopped, I stepped out into a space that looked nothing like the world I knew. A modern estate. Clean lines. Wide glass structures. Expansive grounds that suggested privacy more than display. Vincent was waiting outside. Not in a crowd. Not behind security. Just standing alone, as if this place belonged to a version of him I had not yet met. I walked toward him slowly. So this is where explanations happen? I asked. He nodded once. If you want them. I crossed my arms, trying to steady myself. I want honesty. He studied me for a moment, then turned slightly toward the estate. Then come with me. Inside, the atmosphere was quieter than I expected.
No intimidation.
No dramatic presence of power. Just space, light, and stillness. We stopped in a room filled with windows overlooking the property. Vincent faced me directly. You asked why things changed for you, he said. I nodded. Yes. He exhaled slowly. Because I decided not to ignore something I saw that day. I frowned. Which was what exactly? He met my gaze. A person who did not hesitate to help a stranger when there was nothing in it for her. I shook my head slightly. That is not enough to change someone's life. For most people, no. His voice was steady. But I am not most people. The honesty in that statement made my chest tighten. I stepped closer, frustration rising. You keep saying things like that, but you are not explaining the part that matters. Why me specifically? Why not just leave it as a kind moment and move on? Vincent was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his tone was lower. More careful. Because I have spent most of my life surrounded by people who only act when they expect something in return. I listened without interrupting. And you did not, he continued. You stopped your car in the rain for a stranger you knew nothing about. You refused payment. You left without asking for anything. I felt my defenses start to weaken, though I did not want them to. That is still not a reason to interfere in my entire life. He nodded slightly. You are right. That surprised me. I did not expect agreement. He continued. But it was a reason to pay attention. Silence stretched between us again. I looked away first, trying to process everything at once. Finally I asked, and the opportunities? The job? The clinic funding? Was that all you? He did not answer immediately. Then he said, I did not create your qualifications. I only made sure they were seen by the right people. I exhaled slowly. That distinction mattered more than I wanted to admit. So what now? I asked. Vincent studied me carefully. Now you decide what you want this to mean. The words landed heavily. Because for the first time since the roadside, I understood something clearly. This was no longer about a flat tire. It was about every choice that had followed it. And somewhere between gratitude and doubt, I realized I was standing at the edge of a life I never expected to enter, with a man I was only beginning to understand. There are moments when clarity does not come like an answer, but like a decision you suddenly realize you have already been making for days. I left Vincent's estate with more questions than I had arrived with. The car ride back into the city felt longer, quieter, heavier. Not because anything had been resolved, but because everything had shifted into a new shape I did not yet understand. That night, I sat at my kitchen table again. The same place where I had once hesitated over a job offer that felt impossible. Now the paper was gone, the decision already made. My new position had begun. My life had already changed. And yet nothing about the emotional weight of it felt simple. I kept replaying Vincent's words. I did not create your qualifications. Only made sure they were seen. That sentence refused to leave my mind. It sounded reasonable, even respectful, but it also confirmed something I was struggling to accept. My life had been observed from a distance long before I ever knew it. The following morning, I went to work as usual. The clinic was busy, familiar, grounding in a way that helped me think without spiraling. I focused on tasks, patients, conversations with coworkers, anything that kept my mind from drifting back to the estate, the glass walls, and the quiet man who spoke like every word had already been weighed in advance. Around midday, my manager called me aside again. This time her expression was different. Not confused, not cautious, curious. We received another update, she said. I frowned slightly. About what? She handed me a printed email. It confirmed expanded funding for the program I had joined. Additional resources, additional staffing, a long list of improvements that would fundamentally change how the clinic operated. I scanned it quickly, then stopped. At the bottom, a note referenced continued support from a private partner. Anonymous again. My chest tightened. This is the second time, I said quietly. She nodded. And both times it seems to align with your projects. I looked up. You think it is connected to me? She hesitated. I think someone is paying attention to your work very closely. After work, I did not go home immediately. Instead, I drove without a destination, trying to untangle thoughts that refused to separate neatly. Eventually, I parked near the river and sat inside my car, watching the water move slowly under the afternoon light. That was when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Then I answered. Hello. A familiar voice responded. Calm, controlled. Vincent. I hope I am not interrupting. I exhaled slowly. You are not. A pause. You have been given the update. It was not a question. Yes, I said. Twice now. Another pause. Then, I assume you are beginning to understand. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. I am beginning to understand that my life has been influenced in ways I did not agree to. Silence followed. Not defensive. Not rushed. Just quiet acknowledgement. That is fair, he said. I looked out at the river. Why are you calling me? Because you said you wanted honesty. The answer caught me off guard in its simplicity. I waited. He continued. Then I will give you the rest of it. My heartbeat slowed slightly. Go ahead. I did not interfere to control your life, Vincent said. I interfered because I recognized something rare. And because I knew if I did nothing, it would continue going unnoticed. I closed my eyes briefly. You are talking about me like I am some kind of project. No, he said immediately. I am talking about you like someone who should not be overlooked. That silence felt different. He added, but I understand if you do not want this. I opened my eyes again. The river kept moving, indifferent to everything happening inside my mind. I do not know what I want, I admitted. It was the first fully honest sentence I had said all day. On the other end, Vincent did not rush to fill the silence. Finally, he said, then do not decide today. I frowned slightly. That is your advice? Yes. A pause. Because I believe people should choose their lives with clarity, not pressure. That answer stayed with me long after the call ended. That night, I sat by my window watching city lights blur through the glass. I thought about the rain, the roadside, the stranger who was not a stranger. And I realized something I had been avoiding since the beginning. This was no longer about helping a broken-down car. It was about two lives that had already started moving toward each other long before either of us understood why.